Donald Trump has now publicly denied being a Russian agent, that he has worked for Russia during one of those yelling over the helicopter question and answer sessions outside the White House that have become sort of a commonplace way for him to not really have to answer questions because it's just so loud and he's so rushed and the helicopter's waiting for him. And of course, the fact that we have a president denying this sort of speaks to the absurd difference between the situation today and the situation with any recent president that I can think of. So let's think back in reverse chronological order. With Barack Obama, the questions were about policy. With George W. Bush, the questions were about policy. No one was seriously considering that the president might have been, at some point, or still was as a president, an asset for a foreign government. We might say this decision plays directly into the foreign policy of a particular country or a group of countries. But with Donald Trump, not only is there a question of whether this is an individual that is a de facto Russian asset, it's being discussed in media. The FBI was investigating the same, and the president has now publicly denied this. That is an indicator of how far the Overton window has sort of moved with the types of questions we have to ask about the president of the United States. I was even thinking back to Richard Nixon. Even with Richard Nixon, who ultimately resigned in shame, amidst all of the horrible things that he did, there was not a question of, is Nixon a Chinese asset, for example, and China particularly relevant when it comes to Richard Nixon. But here is Donald Trump yesterday outside the White House having to answer this question, but it's not even as simple as he makes it sound here is in his answer. Take a look at this.
Have you ever worked for Russia? Yes
I
or
never
no?
worked for Russia. And you know that answer better than anybody. I never worked for Russia. Not only did I never work for Russia, I think it's a disgrace that you even asked that question because it's a whole big fat hoax.
So he's not, he is denying it, but he's making it seem as though it's a very cut and dried and simple thing. As usual, of his own doing, it is way more complicated than he's pretending here. Remember that compounding the insanity, like a high interest rate savings account, to use an analogy. The insanity is that when that wacky Fox News judge Jeanine Pirro asked him basically the same question, he said everything except for, no, it's not true. We played this clip on yesterday's show. This is just a reminder. Again, it's not as simple as Donald Trump is pretending that it was yesterday in front of his helicopter.
The FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation the day after you fired James Comey in May of 17. And the investigation was whether you were actively working for Russia or unwittingly. So I'm going to ask you, are you now or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing.
So as I pointed out yesterday, saying that they found nothing is not a denial. Saying that it's an insulting article is not a denial. And in the last 24 hours, a bunch of hardcore Trumpists wrote to me and said, David, his statement was fine. It was a denial. Nothing to see here. Except we now have a report that Donald Trump's own aides found that denial fell pretty short of what they would have wanted. White House aides are now expressing regret that Trump didn't more clearly and more forcefully deny being a Russian asset on Jeanine Pirro's show. Absolutely stunning what we have taking place right now. Not only was there an FBI investigation into whether the president is a Russian asset working for a foreign country's interests above American interests, not only is the president publicly being asked to confirm or deny whether he's a Russian asset, his denials are barely denials, and they are raising even more questions, including from his own staff at the White House. Isn't it time now for anyone who doesn't want to maybe be working for a Russian asset to quit working for Trump's administration? Hasn't it gotten to that point, or have they decided they're going to go down with the ship? And maybe if they're staying, I mean, I'm thinking out loud here. If you can survive this as a staffer of Donald Trump's, there's a case to be made that you can sort of survive anything. And maybe they end up with some great job prospects by virtue of having been able to survive this. It's hard to imagine anyone wanting to hire Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Stephen Miller to work for them at this point. It's going to be particularly difficult to hire them if they're in prison after this is all said and done. But I think that's probably more wishful thinking at this point. The key message here is look at how far the goalposts have moved from there will never be an investigation to one where there have been multiple indictments. We learned that an investigation was opened by the FBI into whether the president is an asset for a foreign country, in this case, Russia, and his public denials of it are weak-handed at best. The goalposts have moved, and that's what you need to remember. Today's program is sponsored in part by Blinkist.com/Pakman. If you've not already heard about Blinkist, it's amazing. It's an app for your phone, tablet, or web browser. And what they do is they take nonfiction books, popular nonfiction, critically acclaimed nonfiction. They condense the book into a 15-minute audiobook. You get all the most important information and insights from each book, but you can soak up the entire essence of the book in one sitting. I've listened to a ton of books on Blinkist. One recent one is Robert Reich's new book, The Common Good. Also Bunk by Kevin Young, useful in preparing me for the pseudoscience miniseries that we're producing. And if you are a David Pakman Show viewer or listener, you can get a 7-day free trial by going to Blinkist.com/Pakman. If you're watching on YouTube, use the link in the video description. After the free trial, if you like it, you can get the full access to thousands of condensed audiobooks for about $5 a month. That's BLINKIST.com/PAKMAN.